start of session. It's the last session of a scientific conference, so let's try to keep it on time. We are all a bit tired maybe, but let's listen to the last presentations. And my name is Simone. I work at Luke, and I'm co-chairing the session together with Richard.
Yeah, I'm Richard Whitted, and I'm from Forest Research in Scotland.
And we have listened to a lot of good scientific content so far. Our session is a bit of, let's say, multidisciplinary. There will be different topics addressed today. And I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Michele Bozzano from FI, that is managed to arrive here notwithstanding some travel troubles. And so I think we can start. And Michele, please, if you want to introduce yourself as well, then please you can start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Simone, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry if I'm giving the speech sitting down, but I have some difficulties in standing. Hello, Ben. Nice seeing you online. Hello, Chris. Well, first of all, as introduced, I'm the coordinator of the European Forest Genetic Resource Program based in EFI. Well, I will give you a few, first an overview of the EUFORGEN program, and then on the strategy that we released at the end of last year, which is the main focus of this well, of my presentation, what we want to bring your attention to, and which especially brings some very concrete actions. And then I will also briefly introduce a project that recently started, which is part of the implementation of these activities. So first of all, what is EUFORGEN? EUFORGEN is a collaborative program on forest genetic resources in Europe, and you can see there the countries that they are currently member and financially supporting EUFORGEN. We have 26 countries, and hopefully by tomorrow there will be 27. And as I mentioned, it's financed directly by its member countries. And it works in phases. Currently, we are in the sixth phase of EUFORGEN, and that runs from 2020 until the end of 24. Something very important that I would like to highlight about how EUFORGEN operates and what kind of mandate we have. So basically, the ministries that are responsible for forestry in all European countries, in the moment they sign the letter of agreement with EUFORGEN, they nominate a person. The person is supposed to represent the country in whatever related to forest genetic resources. So this means that when we meet, when we have the steering committee, which is composed by the national coordinators of member countries, when we meet, we have basically people that are meeting there representing their own country with a real direct governmental mandate. This also comes in the moment we arrive to identify some needs, we arrive to identify priorities. We can go back to implementing agencies. We can go back to the European Commission with the needs that be identified by the country working on a governmental mandate. And this makes whatever we develop, whatever we deliberate, something that is very much close to the real needs and can be listened by the potential donor or by the various actors. Concerning something else about EUFORGEN again, as I mentioned, the governance part with the national coordinators, but there is something very important, is the way we organize the platform. This platform is something unique on the dialogue related to forest genetic resources, on the dialogue between science and policy, science and practitioners. So that's why it's really important that we have the possibility of developing strategy and priorities and develop recommendation. And then with those, we can go back in all the directions. So from science, we go back to policymakers and practitioners, but in the other way around, we can also listen to practitioners, what are the needs, and then we can have the science that is developed to support the needs, and then go back to policymakers with what we have been identified as a change that is needed. On the other side, we can listen to policymakers that identify some specific needs or in terms of action or decision to be taken, so we can consult both the scientific community and the practical community. And within EUFORGEN, what we do, we develop strategy and to define priority on conservation and sustainable use of forest-related resources in Europe. The peculiarity of this is that when we have, well, actually during this phase, we call them discussion platforms. So basically, there are places where we call all member countries to nominate a representative, and then we discuss some specific theme, some specific need or some specific priority that has been identified. So in that moment, we have in one single room the capacity that no other country will ever have alone. So we have the capacity to mobilize a community where all the perspectives of all the countries can be brought together in the same place. So that's why when we develop strategy, our strategy, maybe not the best strategy possible, but it is a strategy that can for sure work in all countries. And this makes, very effective, but also very close to the reality. In terms of mandate, EUFORGEN was established started to operate in 1994, building on the resolution of the Forest Euro process 1990 that was calling for the establishment of a voluntary mechanism. EUFORGEN was officially recognized, or officially formally, both the program and the strategy that we developed in 2015 with the Madrid resolution M2. And in the past 5 years, we have been always also developing a new way to monitor the conservation of forest-related resources in Europe, and we revised one of the indicators. And in the last ministerial conference in 2021, the minister officially recognized the way we propose to monitor the conservation of forest-related resources. As I mentioned, EUFORGEN works in phases. Now we are currently in the 6th phase, and these are the 3 main objectives. So there is an objectives on knowledge sharing, communication, and involvement of stakeholders, and then 2 objectives, one on the conservation and one on the use. I will just move briefly to these other 3 slides where I go a little bit more in details in these 3 objectives. So the one on facilitate knowledge, there is a part on communication. So once we identify the need, we identify the perspective, we identify the actions that are needed to properly, both conserve or properly use forest-related resources in Europe, then we need to communicate with key stakeholders. Then we have, as you will hear later on, we create an information system on forest-related resources, and this information system is an important asset of the community where all European countries are entering data on what is being conserved. So one of the priorities for this phase is to further develop this information system. I will tell you how and which means we are improving it. And then we also contribute to different kind of reporting, the report of the state of European forest or the state of the world forest-related resources. Concerning the coordination of the conservation activities, actually each country is responsible, each country is conserving the genetic resources within its own borders. But what is really important is to have an overall coordination so that we have the same understanding, we together define the priorities, and also we make sure that we don't have conservation gaps, and we also optimize the conservation activities. But I will say a few words about later on about the conservation work. And of course, we monitor the progress in a way that each country can see the progress, but we can see also how much we're achieving within each species. Concerning the 3rd objective on the promotion of the appropriate use, so first of all, we have been, mainly we have been collecting the knowledge available on some specific issues, or in particular the one on forest productive material, and then in collecting this knowledge, in analyzing all the various stages or the various steps in the production chain of forest productive material, we have identified what are the impacts of the various practices on the genetic makeup of the final products. Each link, each step in the production chain has an impact on the genetic makeup. Then we have done an analysis and then provided some specific recommendation step by step. Basically, I mentioned a report, and here you can see the three main reports that were released between 20 and 21. And here I will leave some paper where you have the link to download and also the QR code to get it directly on your mobile. And then please feel free to take them afterwards so that you can get the paper copies. Unfortunately, some of those were only produced electronically, some were printed, but as you can imagine, I had some logistic difficulties in bringing a lot of weight with me this week. I mentioned the first report, the report on forest productive material. So this report is a couple of 100 pages document. And as I mentioned before, we analyze the various steps and we provide the recommendations. These recommendations are for policymakers, for practitioners, for forest managers, and then we divide the various actors depending on the specific field. Many recommendations are really very, very important for nurseries, because still we see that many nursery practices have an important impact on the genetic makeup of what is produced, what is brought to the market, without really having a real awareness of what are the consequences of that. The third on your right is another very important report, the one that I mentioned on the new indicator. So within the community, we have been working on finding a new way to compute, to make an assessment of the status, on the progress of conservation of forest resources, and is based on the strategy that we have in Europe. I will in a while speak about this strategy, because this was the main product that of the first the first 2 years of the phase 6 of EUFORGEN. We have been producing the strategy for forest resources for Europe, and this strategy is basically building on a previous strategy that we already had, that was in the specific looking at the conservation part, but while this one provides a wider, basically wider perspective. I think, well, here the QR code, if you are in a hurry, you cannot wait to get this one, you can already get it, but otherwise I will move directly to the content, what you can find in the strategy. So there is a first part that looks at the conservation, sustainable use and characterization of forest resources. And then a second part that looks more in the change that is needed. And I would like to highlight that the structure that we have been following in the strategy is very close to the global plan of action on forest resources that FAO has released a few years ago. And the idea is to be able to provide the full range of, well, not only the conservation, but also the use and also the change that are needed. What is really important is that we have a final section, which is the implementation plan that really indicates what is needed and how we are working in that. Now, just a little bit to dive into the value section. So I mentioned there is a chapter on conservation and sustainable use. So we have a first part that indicates how we can improve the availability and the access to the information. Information is critical. As I mentioned, we have an information system where we have information about the genetic resources that they are conserved. And later on, when I introduce the EUFORGEN project, I will say a few things about how we are working and what kind of information we are generating and adding to this database. Then the part, and well, so this was about the information that is available, then how we conserve, and basically is following the strategy that we had before. So identifying a way that even in absence genetic knowledge, we can identify the population that need to be conserved and define a target for each country. And then how to promote the sustainable use of forest-related resources. The third chapter, the one on enabling the transition, well, first of all, indicate how we do networking and how we support, well, how countries support each other in capacity development. Then we identify how we can support the policy making side, as well as how we set priorities, how we identify research needs. Finally, well, we have an ongoing communication strategy, but then communication is a very critical and important element, simply because we really need to involve all the key stakeholders in the changes that are needed. I mentioned that there was, sorry. I mentioned there was the last section, the implementation plan. The implementation plan, as I said before, in all the chapters, at the end of each chapter, there are key commitments and recommendations. Key commitments, basically the country or the community, they commit themselves in what is needed to be done in the next 10 years. Then in the implementation plan for each commitment, we identify what are the actions that needed, what are the indicators that we will use to see if actually it was achieved, what is the timeline, and who is going to do it. And who is going to do it basically is either the community as a whole or a responsibility within individual countries. As I mentioned, we had already a strategy that was looking more on the conservation side. So in terms of what is new in this strategy, well, first of all, we follow integrated approach conservation, including not only the conservation, but also looking at the sustainable use. And then we identify how we will make use of different level of genetic knowledge as it is available to set a new conservation target and also to optimize the conservation activities. We set priority for conservation. Something that is very important to highlight is that despite I've been working on this approach for, well, nearly 2 decades, but in a more structured way in the past 10 years, still most of the conservation activities are happening for a handful of species. So the conservation gap is still enormous. And even if ideally we want to conserve all species, still it cannot happen from one day to another. So we identified also a way to set priorities for the conservation. And of course, as I mentioned before, some of the commitments are for the individual countries and some of the commitments are for the community, for EUFORGEN as a community. We identify also some of the important challenges that we have ahead. So the first and the most important one is achieving, well, the same level or the same strength in implementation across all European countries. And this is something that is very peculiar in the way, well, you also know very well the way genetic resources can be conserved. It's very difficult, very hard, if not even impossible, to conserve them in a gene bank. So the best and most efficient way to conserve the genetic diversity is having it in the population where they evolve, that can adapt and maintain with all the ecosystem, all the various symbionts that are there. So this means that in order to properly conserve the genetic diversity, we need to work at the level of distribution range. So it means that all countries where the species is occurring need to be adopting the same strategy, following the same strategy, and ideally reaching the same level of implementation. I mentioned one of the important targets is the characterization. A characterization that is done, well, the first and easier level is the climatic environmental characterization, but then we are working on the genetic and phenological characterization. So this level of characterization is important to reach, but it's important that we can reach it throughout all the distribution range of species. As I was saying before, a handful of species, well, to be precise, 6 species alone account for more than half of the conservation effort. Either if you count the number of hectares or the number of population that have been conserved, which is the way we think that is the appropriate way to count the effort, but still 6 species alone account for half of the number of the genetic conservation unit that we have in Europe. So this means that many species have been completely neglected. So we don't know what kind of forest we will have in the future. We don't know what kind of species, because of a new pathogen or because of new dieback or whatever, will disappear out of our landscape. So this means that some of the species that now we are neglecting could be the species that will be supporting our forest in the future. So that's why it's important that we manage to achieve the same level of implementation throughout all, for all the species. I will now just introduce you 2 or 3 key commitments so that you have an idea of what it is about and what are the actions that are associated. The first key commitment is a commitment that is commitment for the countries. So the European countries commit to establish new genetic conservation unit according to the pan-European minimum requirements and aiming to fill the existing conservation gap. As I mentioned, most of the species have been neglected. We know what are the gaps, and countries have committed to keep identifying this gap. Sorry, the gaps have been identified, but to identify population to conserve in those gaps. Another key commitment, which is very important, which in this case looks at EUFORGEN as a community, not individual countries, is committed to improve the characterization of the genetic conservation unit that are part of our FGs. And some of this characterization, the first level, the first step is to characterize it climatically, environmentally, and also using remote sensing. This is something, redoing the information system, actually, we have here Jarkko Koskela, who actually was the one that developed and drive the creation of the FG's information system. Nearly, it was 2007 when we started, 2010 when it was finalized. As you can imagine, information system based on technology, it gets obsolete quite quickly, and it really needed to have an upgrade of this information system. But we also needed to have some more information about the climate, the environment where this population are growing. Because allow me to just to open a small bracket here. We love 3 species and we want to conserve them, but it's not only because of this that we are conserving them. We conserve them because ultimately we want to make use of them. Either making use of this genetic diversity through active forest management, or to make use really collecting the seed and planting where it's needed. So that's why it's really important that this conservation provide key and crucial information for the way these are going to be used later on. So as I mentioned, we need to upgrade information system. We need to characterize climatically with remote sensing, and this is going to be done entirely by the FGR project. And I also have here some leaflet, and you can see there are a QR code, and feel free to get it now so that you can follow us on Twitter or subscribe to the newsletter. So this FGR project is entirely following what is EUFORGEN mandate and EUFORGEN activities, and objectives for this phase, characterizing what is conserved and providing services for the end users. For some reason, this is, I thought I removed all the animation, but apparently some of them remain. So I will have a little bit of fun now in trying to go back every time to this slide. But anyway, so basically, okay, it worked. This project, this is an Horizon 2020 project that is funded and started at the end of, at the beginning of 2020. As the main activities, the characterization. I think it worked. No, it didn't work. Sorry about that. I think I can just skip this one and go directly to the next one. So basically, what FGR is doing is characterizing the network genetic conservation unit in increasing the quantity and quality of data that we have in the information system and is creating new services for the end user. The end user being the initial focal point, the one that entered the data into the database, but the end user meaning also the one that are interested in using the genetic diversity that is being conserved. We, as main activities, we are updating the information system. Well, they will have interactive maps and different kind of search functions, but especially the possibility for downloading the information and also for uploading data on the characterization, on the genetic characterization and on the phenotypic characterization. What I wanted to show you now is something specific on the remote sensing. Some of the genetic conservation units that we have in Europe are in remote areas that cannot be visited every year. On top of that, they are visited sporadically. So basically, the authority responsible for managing, controlling, and conserving this genetic conservation unit can see them only maybe on a couple of hours on one day. So what we, through a collaboration that we have with JRC, we use remote sensing to get data on the genetic conservation unit from remote sensing. So what you can see here is an example of a genetic conservation unit in Spain for Pinus pinaster. And you can see, well, some of the data come very straightforward in terms of slope and elevation and so on. But what is interesting is that we can get data like the normalized difference vegetation index or information about the gross primary productivity. And we get it, it is estimated monthly, so you can see how these things change within the year, but it's important that you can see the trend. We can see the trend from one year to the other. And then we have information that can be even more important, like the land surface temperature or the evapotranspiration. So these are very, very important information because we can see when a population is going to be really, is going to face stress that is much higher or that's been facing stress higher and higher year after year. So we know which are the population that are going to be under more severe threatened to be completely wiped out, or a population that need to be managed in a way that will be able to adapt faster. And well, something else, but this is not going to be possible for all Europe, but we also get information about a spatial distribution of NDVI. Well, no, sorry, this one is the one that the leader is the one, the Jedi, that is not available for Europe. But this is also very interesting because you get an idea of what is the economy profile within your genetic conservation unit. This one, on top of all the climatic environmental data, allow you to have the ecological niche of the population, and you can see it where respect to the rest of the species, where this population is occurring. Telling or important to get the marginality of the population, but also important to see when a population is forecast to be under severe threat. Another important element, another recommendation that we have in our strategy is related to linking the information system to other relevant information system in Europe. And as I mentioned already, we are using data from remote sensing, but we are also linking it to existing database mainly with soil, with temperature and environmental data, which will allow to know better where the species have been evolving, but also we are linking to the formative information system where the forest quotative material is available. And this I go back to what I was saying before. We conserve the species because we love the three species, but we conserve the genetic diversity of those species because ultimately we want to make sure that this diversity is accessible and this diversity can be used. So for this reason, we have a close collaboration with the European Commission, DG SAN, that is maintaining the formative information system. Within FORGENIUS, we are simply having a simple linking, so downloading the full data set and seeing basically where we have information about the genetic conservation unit, where this genetic conservation unit, where are the seed stands, where this information unit is easily available and close by. But with the new fundraising that we have been doing, and very likely is going to start possibly already this year, we are also going to have the live linking between these two information systems. Ideally, this live linking will allow the environmental characterization that we do for the conservation unit also to have it for the site where reported material is available. So this means that whoever is interested in doing breeding or simply doing a presentation can know much more about the environmental condition where the reported material have been evolving. And this is all what I wanted to tell you, and I hope this gives you an insight, an overview. I need to find a way to fix this. Well, yes. And thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was a very interesting presentation, and the amount of data that are being collected are amazing. And yeah, as a scientist, I always get super excited about this, the access to this information. And we have some time to
15 minutes for questions.
Okay, sorry, I was running away already.
No, please, since you're here, and yes, if anyone wants to ask a question, please.
Also provocative ones.
Well, I think that I really want to see so greatly compiled and organizations. This morning in the panel discussion, I think it was the need for an overview of the European seed orchards. Is this somehow connected, or is it?
Sorry, European seed?
That's the only seed orchards, and it is distributed, and they are actually is it aimed for, or what is the connection? Well, maybe is it aimed for, but also that information from the seed orchards and the use of that material to connect with
Okay, normally the seed orchards are not part of our conservation network because we look for, well, sometimes they are even artificial population, but they need to be, well, ideally coming from a specific location. Some of the seed orchards, depending on how they've been structured, they are considered also a sort of ex-situ conservation, so that in that case, when it's not a provenance trial, when you don't have more than one provenance, then as long as they meet the minimum requirements, that they can be entered in the information system. Anyway, this approach of environmental characterization could very well work with any kind of site. What I didn't say before is that while in the previous information system, we were allowing to enter only the genetic conservation unit that were meeting the minimum requirements, with the new information system, basically we allow countries to enter any site that is relevant for them, but if they don't meet the minimum requirement, they will not appear in the portal, but they will be visible at national level. So this means that any country that has a seed orchard that's found relevant, they can enter in the information system, will not be part of the portal, because the portal display only, present only the population that they meet the minimum requirement, but still the service of the characterization will be available. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Congratulations for a very thorough review of the policies of the strategic document. Is there any space in strategy to incorporate in the list of species non-native genus, as I think they are very valuable efforts in the past to bring to Europe a wide range of genetic resources, whatever. Wouldn't those species be also a very valuable genetic resource that would fit nicely in this program?
Yes, they do. And actually, there are species already that are not native of Europe that are part of the conservation activities. It's more difficult in terms of the way we follow the approach within the strategy, because in the strategy, actually, we use as a reference the distribution range of the species to set priorities for conservation. In the moment you have an exotic species that has no distribution range within the country, it's very difficult to have to set priority to identify a conservation target. But still, many of those populations have been developing some new adaptive capacity to our conditions, so it's important that they can be conserved. So the peculiarity of non-native species that we don't have a conservation target. We cannot define what is the number of genetic conservation unit, but we do have, if you browse the information system, you will see that there are several not native species that are part of current conservation activities.
Questions?
I have just a small question. Did you get any feedback about the key commitments of national authorities? Was it well researched, or how is that going on?
As I was saying before, we use a very strong participatory approach. So basically, we had a working group that was structured with different, in the way that different perspectives of all Europe were present in developing the various drafts of the strategy that we have been circulating. But for each draft was then circulated at European level with all member countries, and also open for non-member countries for comments. So basically, there were no surprises. So basically, all countries were part of defining the conservation target. And it gives an ambition, gives a vision. Of course, we know that it's very difficult that countries will be able to establish 1,000 genetic conservation units in the next 8 years, but still indicate a trend. And many countries have been or have already started the implementation of the strategy. Thank you, Santi.
Okay, maybe we'll let Michele have the hook. Say thanks again.
Thank you very much. I was so in a rush to run away. Yeah, this one I leave them.
Yeah, last one. Yeah, that's it. Everyone, on my behalf, you can hear me, right? This is the pointer. Yeah. Okay. I'm here to talk about case studies for the deployment of improved FRM in different regions of Europe, and the assessments of benefits, costs, and risks. Technical trouble. Yeah. Okay. Okay, next one is here. Before I conclude, we first have to check out what we have done and what we have promised in early days, some 5 years ago. In other words, what were the objectives of our consortium? The biggest issue, the biggest objective was that to increase forest survival, health, resilience, and productivity under climate change and natural disturbances. And further, B4EST will provide tree breeders, forest owners, managers, and policymakers better scientific knowledge of adaptation profiles and so on. But what I'm focusing here on this presentation is the two with the yellow ones, the decision support tools for the choice and use of RFM and the policy recommendations for RFM. In other words, task 5.3, I'm the leader of that task. And first I have some slides here to show you what are the aims and the emphases back then in 5 years ago. And then I show you have we achieved them or not, as simple as that. So in task 5.3, we try to figure out the impacts of deployment of improved FRM in 4 different regions of Europe. And those regions were Nordic countries, Scotland, Atlantic range of Southern Europe, and alluvial regions of Southern Europe.
I'm not sure if the mic is open, actually.
But I have a loud voice.
Yeah, up here, that's good. Could be better for
Okay, now it's much better. It feels like home on the stage. Okay, let's go further. So their primary objective in Nordic countries was to somehow figure out the improved FRM in multifunctional and sustainable forest management in changing climate, and that we'll try to analyze in that particular region. In Scottish Woodlands, we focused on forest resilience, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. In Atlantic range, we focused on management scenarios with risk assessments, both biotic and abiotic, under, of course, changing climate. And for alluvial regions, new associated management scenarios were evaluated for different objectives. For example, the traditional plywood production and biomass for bioenergy and so on. Well, this slide is just to show you that what we have done. Don't pay too much attention to those detailed numbers. Also, these are just to show you that we have done a lot of work and the details can be found in the deliverables already published or underway. But in Nordic countries, we have a case study which kind of covered 10 million hectares, a large area, almost 6 million hectares in Sweden and 4 million hectares in Finland. And we had there 3 different scenarios. The first one was BAU, business as usual. It included some improved FRM, not much. It based on the historic levels of applying improved FRM. Then we had a second scenario, increased use of FRM. That was called ROT. And then the third scenario, which was kind of focusing on resilience and carbon sequestration. And it included a lot of improved FRM in the forest management. And here you can see, actually this is a good picture because you can see the magnitude here. We are talking about quite big volumes. This is the volume of growing stock in Sweden in that particular region. And in Finland, there are 2 other graphs. The same scenarios were also there in Finland. The business as usual, productive, and the third one. What I want to show you or highlight in these 2 graphs is this here. This is the I'm too old to see there. This is the carbon balance, including stocking and soil, that graph. And you can see there that in the first decade from now to 2030, you see that 2 of those options or scenarios fail in if we are going to sequester carbon. These tend to be carbon sources. But then the situation gets better, and these below 0 bars indicate carbon sinks. Good. This one, yeah. Well, next we have Scottish Woodlands, and in Scotland they did actually 3-phase analysis, very thorough, and I'm showing 2 of them right now in this presentation. The first one is that they first conducted a survey asking private and public stakeholders' opinions on what are the most important issues for private stakeholders and for public stakeholders. And timber and biodiversity was the highest priority benefit, so to speak, for private stakeholders, and public stakeholders emphasize biodiversity and aesthetics. That was a big surprising result for me, at least. And then the traits to be bred, again, private stakeholders emphasize, again, I cannot see here. I cannot see you either. It's yeah, this is tolerance and tree form for private stakeholders, and for public stakeholders, this is tolerance and climate resilience. Yes, thank you. Okay, then another, this is Scotland again. You have here, you have 4 maps on the left-hand side, and those maps are for Scots by the upper ones, and the lower ones are for Sitka spruce. Don't pay any attention to the table on the right-hand side yet. We have here this is the present time, and this is the 2020 year for Sitka spruce and for Scotch pine. And we actually, what the Scottish did, they applied the climatic sustainability, suitability, let's say, map, so that the red colors indicate not suitable for growing Scotch pine and not suitable for growing Sitka spruce. And here in 2050, it's the same 3 species, and it was forecasted with the this is awful. I'm so sorry. RCP6 greenhouse gas forcing scenario, and the RCP of course stands for representative concentration pathway according to IPCC. But what is important here is that the green areas here for Scotch pine, actually the coloring is not so good, but it actually diminishes from current day to 2020. And at the same time, we have here extreme droughts depicted in this table, and you don't have to pay any, let's say, detailed attention what are these different circles, but the main point is that the colors are changing, and the color kind of depicts the frequency of a drought to happen in a decade. And there are different levels of drought severity. This is moderate drought -1 SPEI index, and this is very severe -2.5. And what we see here is that in this left-hand side, if you look at those maps carefully, I'm sorry they are too small scale, but still, Scotch pine becomes marginal for timber production, and Sitka spruce loses areas suitable for good quality timber because higher elevation becomes available and suitable for Sitka spruce. And it's known fact that in high elevation, the wood quality is not so good. That can be considered as a risk. And on the right-hand side, the conclusion is that North Scotland zero droughts are more frequent in the future, and this causes defoliation damages to spruce crops. This is also a risk. Then to the Atlantic range, this was kind of nice and neat study. This was Sven Mutke and collaborators or co-workers did this analysis. And it was provenance-based models for maritime and stone pine under alternative future climate scenarios and the risks and benefits of improved FRM. And for maritime pine, 9 provenances along the European Atlantic coastline were selected, and for stone pine, 10 provenances scattered in southern and inner Spain, in Portugal and in France. And the idea was kind of simple, that they modeled a prediction model to predict the mean tree height at age of 15 years. It was a linear mixed effects model under different scenarios, climate scenarios. And these maps has to be interpreted so that there are, you see, is this, what is the number, 250, 250 and 260, oh, yeah, sorry. This is year 2050, 2080, 2050, 2080. This is based on climate scenario 2.6 RCP. These are based on 8.5 RCP. And what we see here actually, if you look very carefully, this is year 2050. This is the comparison to present day. The more red the color, the worse news for us. In other words, if there are a lot of red color, it means that the average height for maritime pine is predicted to be much less. Here is the scale. This is 3 meters, and this is plus 2 meters, or something like that. Like you can see maybe better than me, but this is the scale. The point is that the more red color you have, the more bad news it is. And you can see here that the performance of maritime pine is predicted to improve along the southern Portuguese coast and to decline along the northern Spanish coast in Breton and Normandy and in northern half of Spain. I put there that this would be a benefit, but I'm a bit doubtful. It could be also, let's say, a sort of a risk, or let's say it's a risk to some extent. But in these areas, you can see the green color. So in these areas are doing just fine. And for stone pine, the same coloring, red colors indicate that we are doing all right. Sorry, we are not doing all right. And the green color means that back in year 2080, for example, we have here better predictions for tree height than currently. And this means that the tree height predictions are lower, much lower than today. So as a conclusion, again, wake up. Well, okay. The performance of stone pine along the European Atlantic coast is expected to worsen under both climate scenarios. This is surely a risk, to be honest. And however, in some areas, there are slight increases, but still it's an open question. My opinion of that kind of analysis, this is a task, a deliverable 5.6. I think this is nice and neat, straightforward analysis. Of course, there are risks and reservations, and I know there are top class growth modelers in this classroom, but this is still nice. So to showing us something what we are dealing with when it comes to climate change. And if the findings regarding maritime pine are confirmed by further analysis in the near future, that would be an excellent outcome, since then there may not be enough drought resistance, there would be enough drought resistance in the region, and possibly assistant migration would not be needed. This is a comme ci comme ça result, but I still consider it a benefit. But on the other hand, one might argue that both biotic and abiotic risks play a crucial role, particularly with maritime pine. There are pine pitch canker and drought, and specific traits should definitely be included in the regional breeding programs, definitely. Then to the fourth case study, which is a poplar and in alluvial regions. The green colors, the green areas in the map shows the main cultivation areas for poplar, and then there's a production of poplar on the right-hand bars. And as you can see, France is the biggest poplar producer in Europe when it comes to roundwood production. Almost 2 million cubic meters per annum. And they, during this B4EST, again, I'm not in favor of big postage. No. Well, I think you can hear me anyhow. What is it?
Just straight.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll be here. Yeah, with that one, okay. Now you can hear. Okay, good. The new FRM program in alluvial regions, there are, this, I have to be like this, poplar clones resistant to mainly diseases and olive aphid, and then there's improved FRM clones grown fast and running has been tested. And the benefits for me, I'm an economist, if you don't know from my mumbling earlier, I know too little about ecology. But the point is that lower production costs in poplar cultivation areas, it's a big, huge. 1/3 has been cut off in production costs. And this enables a lot in terms of, let's say, we call it the buffer. In economics, there is we call it the buffer security or something like that. It can provide better environmental sustainability, or it may not happen, but it can. And new opportunities for different end users. And according to the FRM program for alluvial regions in poplar cultivation areas, there are some achievements which you can see here. I just pick up some of them. For example, my favorite theme nowadays is the carbon sequestration, and there's superb efficiency in absorbing carbon dioxide in poplar cultivation areas. But my Italian friends told me last year, or was the year before that, there's one big issue which at least I haven't considered, and is the fact that landowners or some landowners are reluctant to apply improved FRM due to experienced difficulties in selling wood to the private market. There has been meetings among the stakeholders already, but there are several to come, and this is a big issue because it's very hard to overwin attitudes, as we know. We are the prison of our own habits, and this is a big issue, and it's very hard to put a money label or money price tag on that one, but it's definitely a risk. Well, long story short, I am here about to wrap up what we have done in this task 5.3. We have on the left-hand side, we have those 4 regions, and then on the middle column, we have the original emphasis or objective of the case study, and these are the highlighted or emphasized issues or points in each in each region. And the point here is because we need some sort of elaboration. So I make this kind of visual and a bit of taste of humor. And I end up my presentation with ranking these 4 regions, which was the best and which achieved most. Thank you very much. No, it's not your problem. It's my problem. I forgot my glasses.
Thank you very much. Nancy, do you have questions?
Please ask one, but easy one.
It's a very neat question. In the predictions that you made, you also try to put some of the risks and like also economically you try to make some assessment. So you mostly take into account climate. But
Sorry. When it comes to economic, what did you say?
So do you also try to take into account different risks in the economic prediction?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, in those deliverables, we only have several traits valued in monetary terms. But I wouldn't go in this presentation to those details. But we have done. But it's in early stages, to be honest. For example, we have some papers published during this B4EST consortium related to decay resistance and that the monetary value of that. But it's early steps, baby steps we have done so far. So good question. Yeah, I didn't emphasize in this presentation on economic performance because I'm quite strict to myself that we have some results and some published papers, but we are still on early stages when it comes to economic valuation of tree breeding programs or different trades and so on. So, but this was a very nice platform because we have the data now, and we have, for example, the Scottish team. I have to say that they did an excellent work with the deliverable because there are so many aspects, and they actually did a very nice and neat economic valuation, but I didn't show those results here because I only have limited time. Yeah.
Anyone else like to ask? I would ask Nancy, how do you feel about the value of case studies and this type of projects?
I mean, how I value them
In general.
Actually, that's a bit of a joke that I said that here, but it's I value them all very contributing in shortly, but the time is running out because we could do some more analysis, but the deliverables already written. But they gave us new ideas which are definitely in value.
Okay, I didn't specifically mean these ones, but just the concept of.
Yeah. Okay, but as you know, it's difficult to value tree breeding, different traits. As you know, it's absolutely it's demanding work. And we are only at this stage, we are doing those analyses in a, let's say, private sector point of view. No socio-economic impacts still, they are missing. There are only a few papers in the world which tackle with the socio-economic impacts of tree breeding. So.
Thank you very much.
Sven raised the hand.
That's a short comment. When we started this exercise 3 years ago, we first were planning to do this economic approach. But actually, when you are tackling mainly uncertainties, biotic and abiotic ones, it's not easy to do. So the exercise we did with this climate modeling, it's filling the gap. But of course, we are not happy with it because, for example, to say that in Belgium, stone pine will grow some meter more, stone pine is not growing in Belgium. And the first time there will be snow, it will stop the growth. So this is now just an exercise, let's say, and not really feasible to be used, for example, by a private company, or for example, to do economic assessments of your style, building on this. So be aware that it's really honestly to fulfill exercise, but I'm not happy really with to say, okay, let's go further. Just a disclaimer.
I agree with you, Sven, but I have to say that as an addition that all these, that's why I made the presentation so that I looked backwards what we promised and how we have achieved that. And I can say that we have achieved the objectives which were set to us or which we set for us. So this is difficult. This is really, this is hard.
I'd also like, this is more a small comment. I think we should not be surprised when stakeholders like the general public are more interested in aesthetic values or other sources of enjoying the forest resources, because we as a scientist, okay, we think that we have the perfect rational way to use the forest resources, but then we have the majority of the public that they don't understand why we cut trees sometimes and why we replant them and why we are changing species. So I think that's something that we always should take in account. Okay, so we are perfectly on time. We can move to Isabel, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the floor. It's better because my voice is not too loud. Thank you. I'm going to present in a quick way, 20 minutes, all the activities that Portugal has done in forest genetic resources. And this presentation was based on the Portuguese forest genetic resources report submitted to FAO to be integrated in the second report of the State of the World Forest Genetic Resources. As I told you, I'm going to give you a quick overview. First, in the first issue, I focus on some story points that have been done along the years. And then in issue 2, 3, and 4, I'll give you information about in-situ conservation efforts, ex-situ, and some breeding improvement, genetic breeding improvement for the main forest species. So the first studies in forest genetic improvement started in the 60s, last century, with maritime pine, with phenotypic selection in a big area, Mata Nacional do Leiria, National Forest Leiria, with the collaboration of Australian breeders. But the first breeding improvement program was published only in 1987. Now it's over. It can be changed because of many field trails had disappeared because of fire, so we have to make another makeup. Forest genetic conservation activities began in 1991 after Portugal have signed the resolution 2 of the Strasbourg Minister Conference, and cork oak was the first species where people went to make some efforts. All the developed studies created field structures, genetic field structures, such provenance trials, progenies, clonal trials, clonal banks, seed orchards, and also gene conservation population units. Some of the gene conservation units were during 1994 until 2014 included in the EUFORGEN information system belonging to EUFORGEN. They have been revisited, and this is the list of that units. In 2018, an operation program was devised to support at the national level the forest projects, research project and development projects concerning to forest genetic resources management. And 2020, the first 5 projects were approved. So I'm going to give information about what we had and where we are. At the moment, we have no conservation program already approved. The strategy we use is like European strategies, is a dynamic strategies, which the objectives are to create conditions for future evolution, to conserve specific adaptive in marginal population, and to save endangered populations. There are 2 types of in-situ forest areas. One are the population, the genetic conservation, for genetic conservation, which is a multi-purpose, it's not static conservation, as I told you. And a second type is the certified seed production units. Concerning to in-situ conservation units, we have 28 units, 9 of them are already included in EUFORGEN portal, and the area is about 3,500 hectares. I'm going to give some examples. For instance, for cork oak, in 1995, Varela and Eriksson published a paper with where they identified some areas, as I told you, with multi-purpose for cork oak, and some of these areas are under that projects that have been approved are going to be at the time monitored, and according to the manual that was published last year. These areas have been geodifferentiated, all data is collected, and all data is also collected, and trees were selected to be observed phenological for morphological characterization and phenologic characterization. This is one area, National Forest of Capção, cork oak, and this is another area that is monitoring. National Forest of Mesters near Alcobaça, near Leiria. Concerning in-situ certified forest seed production units, in the morning you have already seen this slide. There are 23 different species, 262 certified seed production units, and I focus here the units belonging to the most representative species in Portugal. Concerning ex-situ gene conservation, these areas are areas that comes from our breeding programs, and INIAF and the authority, national authority, ECNF, controls the most of them. Concerning eucalyptus, the private companies has their own collections. So here it is represented seed orchard, seedling seed orchard, progeny trials, provenance trials. But I want to notice you that the main number of trials are at Mata Nacional de Escorupim, National Forest Escorupim. Most of our field trials have been disappeared because of fires, but National Forest of Escorupim maintains the most of them. Not only for maritime pine, but also for humus minor. We have a clonal bank that came from a European project, and also an arboretum eucalyptus that has 110 species, and it was established in 1953. Also, I'm sorry. Okay, cork oak as clonal banks at the south of Portugal, as also an area, a very interesting area with hybrids, with Quercus oak and Serris at Alcobaça near Leiria, and it was established in 1946. Okay. Mediterranean stone pine or umbrella pine is also represented at Escorupim with a provenance trial, and one of the provenance trials established in 1993 was under Silver Mediterranean group, and this year was completely identified and georeferentiated, and we are at the moment collecting all the information of the data from all the, since the first year we have 13 years data, and it's going to be all collected and put together. About genetic improvement and breeding programs, this is a summary. The principal species, maritime pine, cork oak, stone pine, sweet castanha, eucalyptus, Arbutus unido, and Coreba albo. There are different institutions responsible for these breeding programs. And for instance, maritime pine has three main objectives: volume and stem form, resistant to pine nematodes, and recently we started a program, a clonal test to evaluate variability for resin production. I'm going to tell you a little story about maritime pine. This is the objectives we have at the moment, and the first 60 plus trees was phenotypic selected, as I told you, in 1960, and it maintains to 1964. Today, it would be impossible to select 60 plus trees in 4 years. It would be economically not possible. These trees were vegetative replicated to Mata Nacional de Escarupim, Forest State Escarupim, to establish a clonal seed orchard. The first progeny test was established in 1987, and a genetic selection was performed. From this selection, 16 elite trees were identified and propagated to a new clonal seed orchard with 1.5 generations. Concerning resistant to pine wood nematodes, in 29, about 400 plus trees were phenotypically selected as resistant to pine wood nematodes in an area highly affected by the disease, as you see in the pictures. Progeny tests in a greenhouse was started, and we observed that there is a variability among maritime pine for pine wilt disease. The results show that if you choose the best 15 trees, we will get a genetic gain of 40%, but don't be so happy because the survival is not very high. The estimate mean survival is around 15%. So this is what we are now doing, the evaluation of genetic variability for resin production under one of that projects that I told you. The aim is to evaluate 60 plus trees from the first seed orchard that is going to be clear cut. Before it, we decided to start a clonal test, and we observed from the first data that there is high variability and high editability, which is very interesting for us. So, other programs that I have some information here, and that information, as I told you, belongs to the report that I have made it with other colleagues. For instance, eucalyptus, there are Reis and Altri are the companies involved on that. There are 2 independent breeding programs for pulp. Reis has its 4th cycle using overlapping generation shim, and Altri is in the 3rd generation, has a lead population with a border-based population. Quercushuber is a university, is in charge of this program, and the objective is cork production. Provenance and half-seed families were studied using quantitative and genomic tools. Castanha sativa is under the responsibility of INIAV, and the objective is to produce new hybrids resistant to ink disease, and transcriptomic and genomic studies to obtain insights in the mechanisms of resistance are being studied. Coronao is also an INIAV, under INIAV responsible, There have been a phenotypic selection and georeferenced and morphologic characterization, and genetic diversity was assessed by ISSR. And finally, Arbuto Zunedo, who is the responsible of the Instituto Politécnico de Coimbra, Agrarian Institute. The objective is to produce fruit, and 200 plus trees were already selected and georeferenced. Seed orchard has been installed using micropropagation, and G by E interaction is under study. I want to thank all my colleagues who contributed to that report, from INIAV, CNF, UTAD, all institutes, Raiz, Agrarian from Coimbra, and Agrarian School from Bragança. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. So we have time also for a few questions. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you for this. We announced 3 questions. First of all, the units for collection of seeds is the same of basic materials as seed sources and stands in the framework of legislation of compensation of reproductive material in the framework of the Directive 1999/105.
This for seed, it's under national authority, CNF, and they are they manage them, and they have it's the only material that can be commercial for forest plantation.
Okay, so it's I understand that is in the framework of the forest reproductive material legislation. My other question is related with elms, with ulmus.
Sorry, I didn't get.
Elms, ulmus, the species.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned that there is a clonal bank. I don't know if this is the framework of breeding program or this material has been tested for tolerance of that species, or is only a conservation clonal bank for other countries material? Or what?
This is a clonal bank that comes from a European project. The responsible was Eric. I don't remember the last name, but there is a collection in Italy, in France, I think. There is a collection, and one part is in Portugal, other is in cryopreservation, and it was something that I heard, I don't know, I get from my colleague that is already retired.
Okay.
But you have, if you want more information about that, I can get you.
Okay. And my last question is about adaptation and Remark. Surprised me that these breeding programs, because I don't know if the fruits they have some market, because we don't have any market of fruits.
Yes. It's rising the market.
Market of them.
Yes, it's rising the market is rising. It's recent.
And the use is for
you can eat it, or you can make some drinks or alcoholic drinks, but you should not drink a lot because it's not very, yes, you know, the problems.
But we don't understand in general. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, we do eat Arbutus unedo in Italy as well, but it's got niche market. Yeah. More questions?
Not very easy to understand this. Yes, the sound is not very well.
Thank you. So I just have a specific question. I think you mentioned there is a staff with every and workers.
Maybe can you ask your question through a microphone here in the because
I'm going to
oh.
try to listen better because the sound is not very good.
I'm just curious that you mentioned that there is a staff with hybrid workers selling sugar. I'm wondering if they produce something all.
Some of the trees have work, but not different. It was, I think, the person who carried that from England, it was very that it was the person who people that we work in the court. And it took them from England because we noticed that it can reduce work. And the objective was to understand the formation of the core. I tried to understand what was the interest, and I came to some books and some history about that, and I found that it was trying to understand. Because at that time, we made a lot of studies on this issues, so it was very interesting to understand. Of course, nor a continuous.
I was just wondering because some people are looking at this in some groups in Spain for the hybrids. So it might be a similar. So
Yeah, I think that it's similar.
This material might be interesting for the audience.
Yes, it's at the moment there is a hearing, there is a person working on that.
Thanks a lot. Yes, thanks a lot for the talk again. And I think now we can go for the break. We have two more presentations after the break, and then we'll be finished with the panel discussions. And we have two panelists present here and then two online. We will present them later, but for the rest of the session, if we can use the microphones here at the table, because otherwise our online attendants, they are not able to hear the questions. But yeah, let's enjoy the break now.
Hello. I don't, you're muted. Hello. Hi, Remy.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, it's sort of okay, a little bit of echo.
Okay. We can hear you well.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready for the panel meeting.
Coffee break, but they will come back soon and the bronze will follow.
Okay.
Are you feeling better?
Yeah, I'm feeling fine, but I still tested slightly positive this morning, so I'm not going to mix with people for the moment. But I feel fine. Great. Okay. I wait. Okay, good.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to be elaborating a bit on the Scottish case study that Nancy introduced, but actually, because it was really quite a multidisciplinary effort with a lot of things, I'm still going to be at quite a high level, not going into a great deal of detail. But let's make a start. Okay, so Scots pine in Scotland, it's the only native conifer. We have juniper and taxus, but it's the only native conifer that's used in production forestry. It's at the western margin of its native range, and it's the national tree of Scotland, perhaps because the English name for it is Scots pine. We along the way there. So it forms a very iconic and important habitat type of Caledonian hardwoods, which is about 10% of the area of Scots pine. It's our second most important commercial species, about 14% of the forest area in Scotland, after cypress spruce, which is 40% of the forest area. We harvest 0.4 million cubic meters harvested per year, and most of that goes into the production of oriented strand board and agricultural fencing, but that's partly due to the geography of where it's produced and where the mills are. There's a lot of demand for those products in those areas. We could probably be doing more to get more Scots pine logs into construction. And currently there are 10 million seedlings sold by to Scotland per year. It's quite an interesting history as a genetic resource. So plantation forestry began in the 18th century, I think, in Scotland. And at the time, Highland Scottish pine was favoured because it had shallower branching angle and more desirable hardwood characteristics. But a major problem was they struggled to find viable seed in north of Scotland, and resorted to imported seed from well-established seed production centres in Europe, which by the end of the 19th century, people were concerned about the deterioration of Scotch fir, and later that led to advice. Okay, I'll continue stopping if I need to. So by the time the Forestry Commission was established after the First World War, imports of seed had largely stopped, or at least it was documented, and there's evidence to suggest that it became rather rare. Provenance testing followed, which showed that for the Scottish market, Scottish seed tended to perform the best in the 1920s and 30s, and breeding began in the late 1940s. But by the 60s, there was a bit of sort of ecological renaissance around Scots pine, with the publication of a book by Stephen and Carlisle called The Native Pine Woods of Scotland. And that led to a great deal of research into conservation, and actually probably a very early use of molecular characterization being used to to guide seed transfer was the establishment of biochemical regions that we use as exclusion tools for transfer of Scots pine. But by the end of the 20th century, the breeding program had closed. So the case study is about breeding, so I'll introduce this first. And what I'll say is the same as any other breeding program that's happened in Great Britain. The intended use was construction timber. There were very intensive selection campaigns in the early days of tree breeding, and over 30 half-sibling progeny trials using plastic backward selection process on 110 sites, evaluated over 1,000 selections. So that cycle was completed towards the end of the 20th century. General breeding population was reselected for height and straightness, which were evaluated comprehensively. Those top selections were archived, but the breeding programs was then closed. Nothing's been done since. In terms of the use of improved FRMs, the sales of planting stock to Scotland from 2005-6 to 2019-20. And you can see there's been a bit of an uptick in demand with ambitious planting programs. And about 50 to 60% is of the tested FRM category from seed orchards. Now, that might be partly because source identified as prepared for restoration, conservation projects, but anecdotally, there's a lack of supply in some cases. But what of these seed orchards, though? I said the sort of investment in improvement had dropped off. And these are the seed orchards that they come from. So here, what I've done here is sort of run index selection on these two traits. And the seed orchards that we're supplying for were done before breeding values could be calculated for Scots pine. So they were best guesses at the time. And you can see that the seed orchard that was set up in 1977 is around there. So quite good breeding values for height, very poor breeding values for straightness. They did a bit better by 1986 with more data, a little bit better in 88. But yeah, there's clearly room for improvement there to set up new hypothetical seed orchards, because we could be getting up to here just by defining a different production population. Okay, so there's clearly room for improvement, but if we're doing that, it's worth asking, what's changed since then? What do people want? How could it be financed and pay off? And what else have we learned since then? So that brings us round to this B4EST case study, where we looked at all of these things with a group of people with very different skills. And it was a really valuable opportunity to kind of review the past and see kind of what can be brought forward. So I'll start with some slides that Nancy has already introduced, which is good because it might save me some time. But just to go over in a little bit more detail, what this was showing was the difference between projected suitability for Scots pine and Sitka spruce in the northeast of Scotland. So Sitka spruce is the dominant crop, and dark red here is unsuitable, darker green is very suitable. So currently, neither Scots pine or Sitka spruce are considered suitable for silviculture at these high elevations. By the 2050s, we might be in a situation where that can be pushed up the hill slightly. And what we're seeing on the lower lying areas, and this is Aberdeenshire, is that Sitka spruce is becoming increasingly marginal and unsuitable because it's from a very oceanic environment. It can't cope with arid conditions. And you might struggle to imagine that Scotland is arid, but there's a great difference between east and west. So, although this is obviously a risk, droughts are a risk to all trees. In this case, it's less so for Scots pine than it is for Sitka spruce, and that bears out in things we're seeing in mixture experiments. So we can see this risk as an opportunity in a way as well to perhaps restock Sitka spruce pine. Another thing is Dr. Stroman septosporum needle blight, which is a major pathogen of pines worldwide and became a problem about 15 years ago in Britain on Scots pine, but partly due to exotic pines, contorta, and Corsican pine, Pinus nigra, or Lauricio, being planted and acting as a conduit for pathogen evolution. And what we have here is an analysis of future conditions and days between April and July, or I think it's the number of days between April and July which are conducive for expansion and infection with Stroma. And for these traits, so these are just different bits of Scotland along the X, so don't worry about that. But what we see is it's warmer, and the Stroma light's warm, but it also likes humid, so days that are conducive in terms of precipitation going down as well. So a bit of a mixed bag, but perhaps the problem won't be so bad in the future in terms of dispersal, of course, all else being equal. Okay, the next thing we did was a question that I asked, what do people want? And Nancy also made start presenting this. So we had 45 responses to the survey, which asked quite wide-ranging questions about rejuvenating Scots pine. And there were respondents were asked to say what sector they were from. We had 25 public sector, 15 private sector, and 5 others, NGOs and things like that. And I think one caveat to note is that people that did the survey clicked on links like this that were about, are you interested in breeding? So people that have absolutely no interest in breeding probably wouldn't have participated. So just bear that in mind. So there was a lot in the survey, but I think probably, of course, the interest in B4EST is the questions around what breeding program we should concentrate on. And these are a bit small, but what we see is that both sectors rank disease tolerance pretty highly, and overall probably the priority traits. And I would imagine that they're thinking about the Stroma. We don't have the nematode or pine-pitch candy yet. There's a clearly the private sector favoured tree form, and they were guided in that it was branching and stringness to get more and better logs, I think. And surprisingly, no one was that fussed about growth rate. So form, because actually growth rates for Scots pine and Scots in the UK are very good, and the pine that we import is slower growth and tighter spacing from other countries. So, growth rate wasn't considered that important. Okay, this is just some miscellaneous things, but interesting things that came up. For example, I kind of expected people to be concerned about the genetic integrity of the native Caledonian pine woods, which is something that's been talked about a lot, but of the people that responded to this survey about tree breeding, nobody really felt that planting Scots pine threatens the genetic integrity of native pine woods. And they didn't think that any improvement would have to be based on native origin material. They also didn't think that, well, they did think that improving Scots pine was worthwhile in public interest, and they thought it was economically sound to do so. And of the few conifers we asked them to rank in importance, I think Scots pine came out second after Sitka spruce. Okay. This bit I will do very superficially because I kind of hope Nancy will pick this one up actually, because I can't talk about it very much, but we wanted to think about how could breeding be financed. And so Vadim Sarayev prepared this economic model, which is a standard growth model, but we asked how would genetic improvement influence volume, which we use in a kind of abstract way as volume, but it's also the chance of extracting that volume, and it's the quality of the logs as well. But in terms of net present value, you can see that 15% genetic gains, kind of 18-fold increase in net present value, and it could reduce the ultimate rotation length as well. So thinking about getting things done, we use this to look at ways of financing. So that could be annuity payments, so per hectare per year, £20 at the central estimate, to breeders. You can pay more directly for the seedlings, and it's scaled to the area of pine in Scotland. So it's not realistic, but if you restocked all the standard Scots pine material that was 10% better or bigger, it would be worth £3 million a year. That assumes, well, it'd be worth 6. This assumes that the genetic gains are split half and half between breeders and landowners, which I think was probably unrealistic, but it was a useful exercise. Okay, some genetics now. So this is where I'm getting to what we've learned since 2000, and I said that there's been an ecological renaissance in Scots pine. And so since the breeding program closed, there's been quite a lot done in ecological genetics of Scots pine, and that includes this series of native provenance progeny trials. This one here, here, and here, and they were based on, they were set up to characterize native pines, so there was no set phenotypic selection of material. They should reflect populations adequately. And they've been phenotyped, they've been well looked after and phenotyped intensively for a range of traits over the years. So for B4EST, we wanted to look at the Dothrostrom response. We did some work in breeding, and we looked at the relationship between susceptibility to Dothrostrom and growth, and we found that moderate to high heritability values, that performance of families was stable across sites, but most sort of strikingly, there's a very strong and favourable negative genetic correlation between Dothrostrom susceptibility and height. I don't know, that looks a bit spurious to me, but I think it's definitely something that is evident, and this is useful. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an intrinsic thing. It could just be a circular argument and that trees have grown better, but it implies that you can select trees based on growth, and you'll be getting ones that are better able to tolerate disease or escape from it. So this is the families in those trials, ranked by an index value, and got both traits, so you can see that they're correlated. And yeah, so the top 40 reselections have a gain of 10 for height, 14 for DNB tolerance, which is really good, but that's just over the average of these trials. What we can do is link them to the breeding population. We don't know where the intercept would be. There's nothing to link this set of trials to what's already in the breeding population. So what we're now doing, and what's really great about this case study, is the opportunity that it provided us to get together and rationalize our ideas, and now manage to secure funding to kind of make a slow and steady start to breeding in Scots pine by infusing reselections from this series of native trials into the breeding population by doing some polymix crosses. We're going to take forward selections from the native trials and reselections from the breeding population. Another stage in that project is, in the interim, can we get better at phenotyping Dothrostrom responses? So Annika, who's here, will be doing these detached needle assays in vitro with parents that are in the breeding population that have never been phenotyped for Dothrostrom before, because it wasn't a problem at the time the breeding program was closed. So I think that's all I had to say. I think it's been a really good project to be involved with, and it's great to see that it's delivering impact already. Should say that Vanessa Burton singled her out with a picture because she coordinated the case study. Thanks also to co-authors, B4EST, of course, and other people who helped with various things, such as advising on the survey and providing data. Thank you.
Thanks for the talk, Richard. So if we have maybe one quick question.
Concerning the finance research, what is the current level of investment in research? It's not finding. What is the current level
The current level of investment in Scots playing breeding.
yes.
Oh, zero. There's none, but now there is a bit.
Perfect. So we can move to the last scientific contribution of the day. Catherine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will have the pleasure to end with a not so specific scientific contribution, but my contribution will be done as a B4EST coordinator and is based on a lot of contribution of all contributors in B4EST. And it's here, is it correct? Okay, thanks. And the idea is I think it's important to share, to show, to explain what are the transformative change in tree breeding to reinforce this contribution of breeding to adaptation and mitigation challenges for European forests. I think it's important not to figure out that breeding we are doing today and we will do tomorrow is the same breeding exercise we've done 50 years ago. And this is important because the wording and the discussion with people is important. Forests are moving to the center of political attention, and that's why it's important to explain, and to discuss and to exchange with all people involved in forest management. So the forest covers a high but varying percentage of global land in European countries. And I would like to insist in varying percentage of global land. If the prospecting review we are doing is really linked to land use, and we have a presentation of who deal with this question of agriculture and forest aspect of land, and that's important. Healthy forests are the foundation to provide goods and services. Healthy forests. The health question is a big question. And here you have the different services which are claimed by many of the people who are interested in forest. Carbon sequestration comes now on the first position at political level, at the economical level. Reservoir of biodiversity is also one of the important international targets. Protection of soil, protection of water, protection of lands are important targets. But what also is important and sometimes maybe considered only at the end, but is also joined, is the interest as wood production for carbon substitution and for all the bioeconomy. And as bioeconomy, I should had also overproduction than wood production. Here we have example of big threats, and big threats, you know, impact quickly and with a major impact on the equilibrium we have and on the production. So we need forests more than ever. It's claimed everywhere, but forests need science and adjusted policies. So I would like to discuss with you how in B4EST we have tried to join science for more adjusted policies. I would like to start with the first production of the project, which was important for us. It was a survey coordinated by our colleagues at EFI regarding the perception of tree breeding in Europe. And this survey done, more than 500 responses were collected from different stakeholders and from 9 EU countries, and mainly on the 8 species of interest in B4EST. There are native species, but also exotic, eucalyptus and Douglas fir. And it was important for us to have this view. The results are the following: high expectation on diversification of tree species. So people expect from tree breeding to have higher diversification. That continue to have plantation with improved forest for productive material, but help in revision of guidelines, which still need to be adapted. Not only think about breeding and improve material for regeneration by plantation, but think also to enrichment of natural regeneration with better adapted forest for productive material in a compatible way. The survey also underline the trait of importance, and it's nice to see and to compare the results at the scale of Scotland just showed previously. First, global view, it's adaptation, but behind adaptation, when you have more precise declination, you have the wording resilience to both abiotic and biotic risks. And the list of biotic risks is like that. Species specific, country specific, so quite difficult to handle, and we will discuss that later on. For growth, it's still, of course, people want to have economical value from the forest. So the interest to have also a free and growing forest is important. What quality seems also for the end users still express an interest to have not maybe precise, but more, still homogeneous and predictable what quality of the results. They have to plan. It's the results for them for the future. As discussed also this morning for Stotsvine, non-wood production appear as a potential interest. What you can see that all these traits are linked to mostly carbon economy if we want to see a big change. So carbon economy regarding policy. And so if we have to go back to adjusted policy, we must try to do the link of how free breeding and this carbon economy could progress. But there were change. When you see it is near what so in the past and still I think for few years ago, people present tree breeding to improve performance of growth, performance on wood quality. So it's really targeted to performance. Now it's clear that the contribution has to tree breeding, it's to help for forest risk management. We change the mind. We are in a situation where now forest risk appear as quite important, and we have to maybe have analysis and see the traits in a way to analyze forest risk management. If you take this forestry view, you know all that risk is a combination of three components, which are the hazard, so presence or not of the hazard, which are exposure of the hazard, are we increasing or not this exposure to hazard, and also the vulnerability of the system, so vulnerability of the species, of the forestry material, or even the way we are cultivated or managing this forest. Here, be concerned that the forest risk management view, as it is a combination, tree breeding could own and forest for productive material deployment mainly manage exposure, vulnerability, which correspond to adaptation and resilience approach. But if nothing is done regarding hazard, so the idea of increased temperature, extreme temperature is a new hazard expressed. That means that we are also dependent of mitigation action. So we all is linked, and so it's important for us to explain also on policy that we could not solve the problem only doing and working on. We are relying on the whole view. Regarding the perception of tree breeding in Europe, we have to complete it. In our survey, we mainly target to really people interest by expressing interest by forests, but forest economy in the forest-based sector. Now it's important to see how we see the expression by society in general. We have it through the EU survey for European forest strategy. I do not know if you have an answer to all these questions. In France, we have a specific national consultation called Assise de la Forêt, end of last year, with a lot of debate, inviting people, discussing, and so on. And what appear are their expression of interest. Be careful, now we're afraid about erosion of biodiversity. Exploiting forest is a risk for erosion of biodiversity. Intensive forestry is a risk. So more intensive forestry is risky. We have increased risk using forest for productive material improved because you know it has been selected on 7th wave, low genetic diversity, so high risk. And this view of landscape quality erosion, because of this view of forest for productive material means homogeneous stand as a viewer, it's a looking view for homogeneous project, and it's not considered it's interesting at the landscape view. So it's still most of the society not involved in the business, society, urban people, and so on, say that tree breeding's results should much more concern on environmental, what they call environmental challenges, natural and heritage protection, and also have this view of one health of forestry, but also health of human from the cities where they want to go in this peri-urban forest to go. So you see that the objectives are quite different, but maybe they could rely on the same option, and it's our duty to have a better dialogue to strengthen. I think it's important to demonstrate that breeding contributes to long-term diversity management. Breeding is not tree breeding is not completely similar as crop breeding. We are not doing tomato breeding. We are not doing wet breeding. So there are differences, there are similarities, but both we can gain from difference and from similarities, and it's important to explain that. It's also important to explain the difference between conventional breeding. What conventional breeding means that we are using natural process, natural recombination, natural evaluation, and we are not using what is considered as technological way to change the genotype in the breeding population. So it's important to explain what is conventional, what is genome informed. We can inform by genomic information without doing anything on the genome and on the genotype. And what could be different from NBT technology, which the target is to directly change the genome. People are, all is mixed, especially for trees, and I think it's important for us to explain that, because tree breeding means novel technology breeding, and we are doing a lot more. What is important also is to strengthen also that with our action, we have strong collaboration with actors in conservation. So there is a continuum, and we have this change through this species to have a continuum and mutual benefits of action in conservation and tree breeding strategies. Now, I would like to phrase the point between difference between adaptive and transformative change in tree breeding. And I just want to use this idea of changes and different steps in transition, which are not new, which represent adaptation strategy categories regarding the degree of climate change and the benefit from adaptation, and starting that with efficient incremental adaptation for slide and small change, climate change. And you can see that in their publication, they consider that breeding, developing new varieties, is incremental adaptation. No change, not so much spacing, just silviculture scenario, something like that, and canopy management. So you see that it's considered as incremental adaptation. Then after you have a system full adaptation, which is more change, because it's important, and you see in their way that it's a way for them to use more diversification in the system, and also risk management. And when I told you just before that we are in the concern of asking for risk management, that maybe we are now, not only to think that we are doing incremental adaptation, but we are also involved in system adaptation, which is demanding more differences, but demanding also more information regarding response to climate and so on. And you see that for very big change in climate, you have this idea of it's really transformative at a high level. It's transformational adaptation, because here you have a huge impact also on land use, distribution change, and also on the products use and the ecosystem services and the balance of ecosystem services rendered by forest. And what you see, what we hear from the different species things that we could expect from the situation to have different land use because of big change, high change, necessity of that. And that also, that probably this equilibrium with new product, new value, and over ecosystem services is important. So I want to stress the point that finally, yes, in tree breeding, we could not only stop just doing a small incremental adaptation, but we have really to think about cross and adopt and see how to adopt this way to really meet the challenge in time. Tree breeding is still considered. We are happy. All the survey consider that tree breeding is a lever to meet challenges. So people expect a lot from tree breeders. So we're happy. We have support. But are we sure today? I'm not sure so far. So planted forest and forestry breeding, yes, mainly target at that time planted forest. Planted forest could be, should be considered as a socio-ecosystem. So not only as an ecosystem, but a socio-ecosystem, because the management of this planted forest is dependent of the project strategy on this forest, the objectives given to this planted forest, what are the accepted risks, who is taking the decision of this on this forest management. It's not ecology, it's not genetics. That's important to have it in mind. Why? Well, because all this information impact, of course, spatial and temporal deployment, silviculture regimes, and interact of what we know from knowledge and tool produced by breeding. In the breeder's toolbox, we have classically several things. We have genetic resources, we have evaluation of material, we have selection tool, we have recombination tool, and we have this way for deployment. All is concerned. And what is important here from our knowledge and interaction we have with the social part of the socio-ecosystem is, of course, the fuel of our work, which are genetic resources, considering both species and genetic diversity, without, if possible, making too much silo organization with various species, there is intraspecific. No, I think it's important for us to keep the link and not to fix differences in order to be in a better condition. We have this strong and this important subject for which many of geneticists spend a lot of activity. It's to elucidate the link between the genotype and the phenotype and to better have the link in the two sides between both. And of course, these are due to the interaction of what we call in general environment, but something which is quite complex, because environment in our sense, it's both climate, soil, biotic components, and it could also be linked to silviculture regime. And something also, what was still forgotten, and I think we have to keep attention, and I would like to thank the contributor in B4EST project to help us in that. It's to have the thought of breeding economy. If you are not thinking about breeding economy, sometimes some barrier are linked to economy, breeding economy. So that's important for us. So the challenges we have also to be a real level to meet challenge. I try to resume in 3. We have to adjust methodology to accelerate the processes and consider diversity of expectation. Accelerate. Everybody says the climate change go quickly. It's too quick, and natural processes are not quick enough to adapt, so we have to go quicker than them. And then consider diversity of expectation. I think we had a good example here of diversity of situation in Northern Europe, in Southern Europe, for Scots pine, for stone pine, and so on. So do not try to limit to one homogeneous average methods, but please consider diversity of expectation for a diversity of solution. Second challenge we try to have, share new knowledge. We need new knowledge because the environment are new. The phenotype in these new environments are probably new, and so on. The risks are new. So new knowledge on vulnerability to risk and on adaptive potential. So you will see, I do not use the word resistance, resilience, but vulnerability. Why? Because what we are really able to quantify, identify, to confirm is vulnerability. We never can validate resistance, resilience. Resilience needs to be precise. When you take resilience, it's resilience at a given state for a given trait in a given environment. So that's why it's more important to share this information on that. The third one is to better combine breeding with other levels. Not forget, and I think we try to do it in B4EST, and it's important not to forget it. Transformative change in tree breeding, we have explored in the project. I split it in new knowledge and new tools. Regarding new knowledge for the specific tree breeding part, I think we explore tree response to climatic drivers. We go from the multi-site experiment to really explain with environmental covariance. We show genetic variation for vulnerabilities. I prefer to say vulnerabilities than resistance and tolerance, as you tell, and biotic risks. Local adaptation, and we consider now, and I think it's a message, is it still possible to continue to say local adaptation when you have so quick change in local environments? So it's no more possible to explain that is local adaptation. We need really to explain more what is the adaptation observed to which environment, to which covariance, but we have to change the wording. We got a more complete view of the genetic polymorphism at genome scale. 10 years ago, we got model species. Now it's still possible, and we show it has been possible for major economic species at European level to get these high level, high intensity information regarding genetic polymorphism. And I think that's important and to continue. We got also a knowledge of a large diversity of plastic response. You had beautiful presentation the days before on tree ring, on other plates. So this diversity of plastic response is a richness we have to exploit and to integrate. We saw also the potential of group selection, and as new knowledge, we have a comparison of European breeding schemes and possible changes, and where could we have change, and how could be the cost of this change. As open new tools, standardized past and projected climatic data. I think Tongli yesterday, and we had tomorrow we had demonstration from Maurizio and Duncan. It's important to use standardized on a well-chosen scale. It's important. S&P arrays are also very important for traceability, prediction, and diversity. And integrative modeling, we should see multi-trait genomic selection were important. Regarding deployment, new knowledge correspond new descriptor for improved forest reproductive material, limits of the regulation. That's important. Limits of regulation to make better use of the material. You see that it's important to you on vulnerabilities, but I will be maybe less optimistic than most of the talk. I'm not so sure that the breeder have the ability to stop very strong epidemics. When you have a disease with very strong dynamics, I'm not sure that we can do something. Different uncertainty levels are important. As new guide, you see that we need this projected, we need this planter's guide tool as an example. We need simulation tools of effect of silviculture and uncertainty. So at two last slide, transformative change in tree breeding could also benefit from other collaborative efforts. And it's for me the take-home message for future European project, for future collaborative work. We still need high quality phenotyping at different scale. And that, please, we have new technology, numeric technology, imaging technology, and so on. Please, please integrate that. Revision of multi-environment experiment methodology, but collaborative multi-environment experimental methodology, which standards use. They have changed from the UFO. If we want to have new standards, we have to redefine them. Living labs, so experiment which could cross the time, we could experience change in the factors of experimentation according time. That's important. participative research to have collaborative effort. Multi-source information, do not think to be alone. The forest manager, the everyday life in forest could provide important information. The forest inventory are marvelous source of information. And the way that this forest inventory now are well organized to deliver real-time monitoring, precise in scale, in time and spatial safe. So it's important to organize the information to be linked and also to use probably spatial and other guide. Open and share data and share modeling platform. And the last one, more interdisciplinary multi-actor exchange and common project. Work together, we learn a lot working together. We experience error together. And that after it's not, you are wrong. We are wrong and we will change. Training, we are lacking a lot of expertise. We are especially lacking quantitative geneticists, not only in tree breeding, in animal breeding, in plant breeding. New skills, new jobs. You have to populate new jobs. Make value of this diversity of European forest and forest management. And the last message is because we are now on the more southern part of Europe, and please do not let South Europe expect help from southern resource and experience. They could not be alone. It's important. All of the north say, we will take from the south, and Portugal is there, Europe is in it, what to do? So please, we are here in Portugal, we are the southern part of Europe. We need to also help, they are in Europe, and to see how to help. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the exhaustive summary of the project. Probably it's also interesting for our external guests, so they had a better overview. And I think now we move quickly to the panel discussion. And Richard, if you want to take the lead, if you want to.
Sure. Okay, can we invite Jacob and Catherine?
Yes.
You want to come back up and join us? Thanks to everyone online. This is way too painfully to join. I want to have this panel session to be kind of as dynamic as we can, and also where there's interest, please contribute to the audience. So I think what we'll do to start is just go around, ask everyone to introduce themselves as simple as name, institution, and provide a quick response to our first question, which is, what is the role of the expert in the complex interaction between science, policy, and practice? So what's the role of the expert? And should we start with the online guests, please? At the top is Chris Kettle. Well, thanks for joining.
Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me. So I'm Chris Kettle. I'm the program lead in tree biodiversity for resilient landscapes within the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SEAT, part of the CGIR. And I'm also a group leader in the Department of Environmental System Science at ETH Zurich, Switzerland. So background in forest genetic resources and tropical forest ecology. So everything I say is actually outside of the European context, because I work almost exclusively within tropical environments and in the context of developing countries. And so a very quick response to Richard's question, which is a very broad and challenging one to address shortly, I would say the there's some very simple and very important roles for forest genetic resource experts, particularly in the context of restoration and conservation of genetic resources in the developing world. We're seeing, in the face of climate change, massive impacts on the conservation of forest genetic resources, which mean we need to be making some very rapid prioritization processes. Work we've been doing particularly has been looking at supporting countries to actually look at where those forest genetic resources are. So actually just very simply at helping countries to be able to identify where those genetic resources are for a range of species. And to remind everyone that the challenge here is somewhat greater in tropical countries where you might have several thousand tree species and the populations are incredibly different to most temperate tree species. So actually the role of experts in things like spatially explicit mapping, looking at where the distributions of trees are, and particularly in the role of how climate impacts on the vulnerability of different trees in the face of exploitation or land conversion, really needs to have that scientific contribution to help those priority settings and to work across regions as well, because these processes in tree species don't follow political boundaries. So we really need to be able to build, convene, and I think that's something that the EUFORGEN has been fantastic in, and we've built a lot of learning lessons from EUFORGEN in developing regional platforms for forest genetic resources within Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is in the face of delivery of reproductive material, which is a huge challenge faced in the context of massive political commitment for restoring degraded lands and commitments not only on restoration, but also on trees being planted. And here there's some very simple introductions of scientific knowledge which could be really valuable, just simply understanding things like the importance of the genetic diversity integrated into seed collection. So how many trees are integrated into a different seed lot, and when most seeds are actually collected from wild populations, not from improved material or from seed orchards. And we've been doing a lot of work recently in evaluating national capacity to deliver reproductive material to meet restoration commitments. And I can tell you there's a massive mismatch between the political commitments and the national capacities in most developing countries to be able to actually deliver native tree diversities and scale, because most orchards or seed systems are focused exclusively on commercially exotic species. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chris. It was an extremely broad question. Okay, can we go to Bent next, please?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to comment on your sessions here. I am, as you have understood, Technical Secretary of the European Forest Nurses Association, EFNA. And we are following these developments in the both politics and the science on these mitigation, adaptation, and forest management challenges in these years to come. So I would just first say that EFNA is an umbrella organization for the National Forest Nurses Associations. And we cover from Sweden to Portugal. So for us, it's could you say, originally it was formed as a mutual information club or something like that. And it was also when it was established in 1961, a kind of protection of their common interest in the EU regulated legislation they foresee to come regarding especially plant health and certification of FRM. And it's still the main focus of EFNA, actually. So today we are engaged in politics in DG Santé with the plant health and the certification. We are now also in the DG Environment because of the forestry policy and the Green Deal problems here and the 3 billion pledge plants. So, and not last, also in the OECD scheme, because we see it's very, very important that there is a cooperation between EU and OECD on these matters. So, so we are, of course, very dependent on the researchers communicating with the politicians, as we are more or less in between as the people who are going to deliver a lot of the material wanted. We have also now actually taken the step to be a partner in a consortium behind the new Horizon 2030 called Forests. And there we are going to work together with the scientists on what is the importance of the subsidies and so on, and who makes the decision on harvest, and how is the sale going, what type of material is actually sold. And in this instance, I would say historically, the forest nurseries have had a role to be a kind of, yeah, we have had a much local trade, but it has been growing through the last century. To today, are we more or less supplying across all Europe and to all types of customers, actually. So, but we are not only providing material, we are also supplying actually recommendations. And this is where I think the most interesting, could you say, relation between our industry and the scientists is that we are in many cases closer to the customer to convince them. But again, we follow the needs of the customer. We don't have our own policy on this as such. So we are very dependent on the upcoming recommendations. And I will say that it is very, very important that there will be a kind of standardization all over Europe. We recommend, of course, acknowledge, of course, the differences in the regions and the national traditions and things like that. Of course, it has to be so. But I will mention one thing here in the first place, because we have at least good experience in France and in Denmark, where I'm coming from, where we have more science-based recommendations. And in the first place in Denmark 20 years ago or something, the nurseries said, we don't want scientists to tell our customer what's the best. We will take care of that. But actually it was so when we worked on it for years, that it was actually a kind of, you could say, decision support system also for the forest nurseries. So we had a much more qualified, could you say, a dialogue between our customers and ourselves and the ongoing new knowledge. So this is why actually EFNA is supporting the development of the database for Amatis. And yeah, I would make one more little thing in the first place, and that is the market. It's much driven by subsidies, and we see that we have difficulties in getting enough seed sources, and the Commission have more or less asked us to upscale 20%, but we are not able to get all the needed seed we want. So this has to be a focus point, getting more seed harvested, even though the cost can be higher on more, could you say, qualified material. And so when we look at this with the subsidies, we more or less now recognize that in this production chain or value chain we have between the landowners, the foresters, the seed tree producers, and the forest nurseries, we need a much longer window of time between planning and delivering. Today, the subsidies are very a kind of bottleneck for actually delivering the right material for the right place. Many times I will be taking decisions more of an economic, acute problem than the long-time planning of our forests. So yeah, that was my first comments.
Thanks a lot. And just to change a bit the structure now, we would like to ask Barry, our next online guest, what is a recent important lesson learned, or let's say success story, or even failure story, but like an important lesson learned in using forest reproductive material for mitigation or adaptation to climate change. If you have anything to share with us after introducing yourself, thanks.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you've thrown me there because I was preparing to answer the first question. My name is Barry Gardner. I work as a senior researcher at IEFC, along with a lot of the people at the meeting today, a number of the people at the meeting today. Apologies, I can't be with you in person. I'm along the coast at Qashqai. I'm still recovering from COVID. My interests are really on risks to forests. And that's where my interest lays. And I was very heartened in the last two talks to see the emphasis given to vulnerability of in selection, thinking of vulnerability rather than just in terms of growth and performance. I would like to compliment Catherine on the last talk. I thought it was outstanding, and I thought it could really act as a manifesto for the future for breeding programs in Europe. And in particular, I like the fact that Catherine talked about how we need to share knowledge and information, not just between researchers, but with the whole sector. And I think that's becoming more and more important, critically important. I really feel European forestry is in crisis now, and we have to work together in a way that we've not done before. And I'm not sure how to do that, but we need to do it. I'm going to answer the first question because I'm not a geneticist, and I can't easily give you an answer to the question that was just posed to me. And I'm sure there are people in the audience that would have a better idea of such an example. But talking about the role of experts, I think we have to work together, not just between ourselves, but with the whole sector, with policymakers, with practitioners, with the industry. We have to provide the best possible information on all aspects of the forest process, from what material to plant, to the risks, to how to manage the forest. I think we have to alert the sector and actors to concerns and challenges. I think we have to act as activists and take part in open debate about the future for forestry. And I think we have to be more open than we have. I think we have to be more visible than we have in the past. I don't think we can sit and just write scientific papers and that's good enough. I think we really have to enter the debate more and more. And I'm going to end with something that David Bills, who was the head of the Forestry Commission a number of years ago when I worked at Forest Research, and I don't know if Duncan Ray's there, he may remember this being said, but what David Bills said was when he visited Forest Research, he said that researchers should be the conscience of the sector. So we have to be there and telling the sector, hey, this is not the way to do it. There's a better way, or hey, there's this problem that you need to really be concerned about. And so that's a key role for scientists, is to act as a conscience for the forestry sector. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the question that was asked. Maybe somebody else can provide an answer to that. That's me.
Thanks, Barry. No, I know it was a tricky question. And before moving to the next panelist, Jarkko Koskela, I want also to remind everyone here, but yes, we have prepared some questions, but the time is short. We have these interesting personalities here. So if at any moment any of the public wants to ask something, please raise your hand and ask away. And Jarko, I think you have an option to choose which question to answer.
Thank you, Simone. That's good. Yes, my name is Jarko Koskela, and I work at the forestry division of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And well, some references were made by Michele also, the FAO's work on forest genetic resources. And I think overall, I appreciate this opportunity to learn what you have achieved during this project. And this is just to say that, of course, the triangle between science, the practitioners, and the policymakers is very important for the FAO's work at the global level, but also at the regional level, and also in different countries, we are working and supporting their efforts. Well, I think I agree a lot what the earlier speaker have said, and I think if I can now choose and maybe focus on this, I mean, the role of expert, and thoroughly mentioned that, of course, expert or scientists to bring the available information to the policymakers and practitioners. But I think going beyond that, I think for the experts or scientists, it's important to know how the policymakers have to operate. We may have some policymakers which are mainly focusing on the forest sector issues, but of course we have many policymakers that deal with many sectors. And of course, they are keen to take the scientific information into account and make the decisions based on that. But I think for the expert, it's good to be aware that, of course, policymakers receive recommendation and guidance from different sources. Of course, when they then make the final decisions, it's maybe sort of compromised decisions, maybe from the point of view of a single group of scientists, assuming like the 3 breeders. So I think following this, it's still important for the experts to then explain to the policymakers what sort of consequences these sort of compromised decisions might have. So of course, this is then still important for the policymakers that they may then recalibrate or reassess what sort of decisions they finally make, taking into account multiple angles. So I stop here.
Thanks, Jarko. So I get it to not be shy in highlighting the risks. And we have a first question.
Yes, I have a question to Jarko. You discuss, you point the point of the importance to have you do feedback and to work together with scientists and policymakers regarding the compromise that are done in regulation. I would like to know do you think that what is the importance of the short-term, long-term compromise in comparison to over-compromise? We are sure much more, compromise, such as multiple ecosystem services, which is delivered by forest. Do you think that this question, because for me it's quite important, and we underestimate the possible impact of compromise of short term regarding long term, because policy want to go quick and to have quick impact, but probably the result at short term could not mean beneficial at long term. But I would like to have your impression regarding experience you receive regarding, because FAO is an old organization And I think at the FAO had probably the possibility to have a look to this the evolution and differences between short-term and long-term.
Thank you, Katrin. Well, I'll try to answer this question. Of course, I mean, the FAO as such is not the policymaker, but we, of course, deal with a lot of them. And so we have, of course, some sort of understanding how they operate. And I mean, the first answer I replied just this information point. But yes, I fully agree. I mean, this is the other element or aspect is short-term and the long-term benefits. And obviously then when the policymakers makes decision, of course, they pay attention to what they can achieve in the short term. And obviously they keep that in mind. And I think they, of course, try to somehow balance this, that whatever they decide brings short-term or even maybe immediate benefits. But also they're trying to support that these decisions which support the sort of short-term benefits would also be supportive for the long-term investments. And of course, this is, I think, good to keep in mind in all the communication and information sharing from the scientific community to the policymakers. And I think to some degree, this also reflects or maybe aligns what the practitioners may expect from the scientific community. And I think also what I think, Katrin, what you just presented, I think I also agree with you that this, as you pointed out, that emphasizing how the crop breeding and how much that differs from the tree breeding. And I think we, of course, we collaborate and we have at the FAO, I'm frequently discussing with the colleagues in the crop sector and also the animals and also in the fisheries. Indeed, if I have observed the debate in the agricultural sector, and this brings to that many of the policymakers, they are maybe more familiar with the crop breeding rather than the forestry breeding. And I think from the agriculture sector, probably the sort of spillover is that there's a much more polarized discussion regarding the increasing productivity and then the other functions of the agro ecosystems. So often there the discussion is either or, whereas, and that brings to the aspect of tree breeding that many policymakers probably don't understand that if you are doing tree breeding, you can still bring the other benefits, like keep them on board. So if your tree breeding efforts are focusing on multiple traits, you're not compromising the yield or the productivity. And of course, you can still meet the future challenges beyond the productivity issue. So I think it's also important to communicate to the policymakers.
Richard, can I jump on that comment just to add something else?
Yes, please do.
Thanks. No, I think it's this concept of experts is important to unpack as well, and I think it's really important thinking about that cross-sectorially as well, because we've got a lot of focus here on the forestry sector, and trees of course occur within forests, but they're also increasingly important in the agricultural sector as well. And I think the role of expertise is not just within the scientific domain, but also within indigenous communities and other and farmers themselves. And I think this is really important to recognize in how we move forward in developing new knowledge about how we use forest genetic resources. And related to that, I wanted to emphasize the point about breeding as well, which I totally agree with. You know, within the CGIAR, there's been a long debate about breeding resilience into crops or into different products or plants. And personally, I don't follow that idea of being able to breed resilience into anything. You can maintain diversity, you can maintain genetic diversity. And what we need to do within the forestry sector as well is provide solutions that are timely now. So in many developing countries, we don't have the opportunity to be able to do very complex breeding or species selection to be able to provide material. What we can do is we can use scientists to work directly with farmers to be able to adaptively respond to evaluation of performance of different varieties or different species in the local context, and be able to build up a kind of citizen science or farmer-based selection of progeny, so that we can actually make better decisions about how we use forest genetic resources within restoration, agroforestry, or other landscape scaled interventions. And I think recognizing that context, and we can learn so much from, for example, the European context, but there is also an imperative to be able to act now in being able to increase trees on farms to improve fruit or nut production, and we don't have the luxury of being able to do very complex marker-aided selection or breeding. Just being able to make sure there's high genetic diversity in the material and the best available is enough at the moment.
Thank you. I can see Barry's hands up as well.
Yeah, I'd like to support what Christopher just said. I think we have to act now in many cases, and we can't wait and say, oh, we could provide something in the future that will do the job. The tools and the expertise exist and can be applied now in many cases. It's just whether we have the will to do it. I also think this idea of breeding resilience into species doesn't seem realistic to me. I think it's going to be much better to have genetic diversity and to maintain it, make sure we protect that genetic diversity so that we can create resilient forests using that genetic material. So I'm fully support what was just said. But I think the key thing is that we need to start doing things now. We can't wait anymore. If you go to many countries in, say, Africa, they're in desperate need of solutions to their tree problems. And I'm not saying forest problems, but they need wood. They're using wood every day to heat their food and to keep themselves warm. And they need solutions now, and the solutions exist. So let's get on with it, and don't plan some 20-year program. We can do it now, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
It seems that I cannot make a hand up on this technical system, but I should like to comment a little bit also on the role of the scientists. And we don't have much time, actually. I can only say that for sure, but we had a lot of data. What I think is very important for us now is that the forest breeders and other scientists actually come together in the same language all over. There might be differences in the different situations and locations and cultures and everything, but we have to have a common language. And that's why we need this Foramatis developed by all means from all sides, so that we have the complete FACTA database. In our industry, we think that we need a FACTA database, but recommendations is not like FACTA in that sense. But it's very important for us in the industry to get a way of understanding the recommendations. So you better work on making this more easy to understand. And in the end, I think this database could be linked to the Foramatis. But again, I think also we need a third database. And that's a kind of information portal on all the master certificates and the produced amounts of seeds and which nursery in Europe that can supply. We have that kind of system in Denmark. And it seems to be a very good way to actually overview other possibilities and getting more into depth of the qualities of the different seed sources. So that's where I think the role of the forest scientists these days, to get together and deliver these information systems. Yeah.
Thanks a lot again. And time is really running short now. I don't know if there is anyone from the public that want to ask a direct question to any of our panelists. Okay, I think in this case, we are good to thanks everyone. And yeah, I think the panel discussion is over. It's 5:30, and I want to thank again all the participants. And I don't know if anyone else better than me wants to have a closing remark. Closing remark?
Yes, now I can. So, thank you to all of you, especially both to all the people who were in remote situation, because it's very important for us that you join us for the discussion. So for me, it was a pleasure to have the possibility to exchange with all of you in such a format, which was a classical format. And that seems not to be so the most populated format for the future, but I'm sure that it's a good way to exchange ideas, to exchange experience, to start with small ideas for big projects, to take back, to have take-home messages, all of you. I'm sure that you will have in your pockets take-home messages, and that's important because that's the way of life. And I just want to say that as coordinator, it has always been a pleasure for me, and it's to support the possibility for you to one day to explore the possibility to be a European project coordinator. It's fascinating because you have the pleasure really to build a project with a large community, because I think that's this point of construction is important. After the construction phase, you have these very, very active things and it's, I think, very also interesting because new people, young scientists are involved in the project. So the family enlarged, so that's nice. So a large family with large experience. Unfortunately, this time we do not have this possibility of travel across Europe, of people just to share the experience of doing research differently in different parts of Europe, to discuss and to have the possibility to identify maybe the specificity of their context in comparison to the others. It's a way to learn. But thanks to all the contribution of all of you, all of you contributors in B4EST, but I must say, all of you external people from the project who challenge us, because it's important to be challenged by the others to produce important results. Thanks to all, I think we can be quite happy when we see the production we left. And for me, B4EST is not the end. It's just the beginning of new adventures at regional, national, European, or international level. So if we just have left some things which could be of use for the next, I will be happy. So thank you so much for all of this input in the project. it's not finished. We are finished to be seated here. Tomorrow we will be outside because field experience is important. And we lacked this reality and field, and I would like to thank Luis and our three collaborators and also EIFC who have helped us to build this experience, so I'm sure we'll be happy. And also, you will have the opportunity to learn more about tools tomorrow and to have a training course. So they are open. If you are not registered, it's not too late. So don't be shy. It's on an open strategy. So if you want to join the group, just ask where it is at what time, and we will be happy to welcome you. So, and for those who left Portugal, have a nice way back, and keep in mind that small specific smell of south of Europe. You will be some example of migration up to north, but avoid to be also example of invasive species with exotic pathogens, and try to avoid to import COVID with you. So have a nice travel back.
Very short technical announcement. There is a dinner tonight. So it's at 8 o'clock, and you have the information with the practical document you must have received.
8 o'clock, I will say.
8 o'clock in front of the restaurant. Okay.
Okay, we can show you the address of the restaurant if you want. Maybe useful.
No, I cannot come to the individual.
Sorry, but it was terrible. I could not stop.
Oh, really? Of course.
No, but I forgot to drink enough with the mask, wearing the mask all the time. And after the talk, I completely.
Came back and gave you perfect wrap up.
Great. Thank you so much for the animation.
For those attending this for dinner, here is the map where
I am. Example of failure and success. Thank you.
Papacoda, the address is on the practical information.
There will be
in a balance.
Site of B4EST.
Important to show if you want failure.
Yes.
The main.
The failure with Contortapine in France, it was.
It's really easy to reach this point because you have bus station, tram, subway, boats that can reach you there. So and that's the restaurant is inside a kind of market. It's called time out. So you first need to time out market. Or then you will find.
I think that's why the idea is not of the species.
Yeah, we'll meet at 8 p.m. and hope to see you there.
The change has not put the point on the wall. Yes. What will be
system.
Thank you.